So it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Rebecca Kosta. She's an evolutionary biologist, and I can hardly wait for her to tell us just exactly what that is. She understands that failure to adapt results in extinction, kind of like the Swiss watchmakers. I think that's the example that I can think of right off the bat. In her work with corporations and organizations, she applies this scientific tenet to help executives quickly adapt in today's high failure environment to not only avoid extinction. Anybody here curious to avoid extinction? That doesn't sound like a very pleasant thing, but actually to thrive. She's a former CEO and founder of one of the largest marketing firms in Silicon Valley, and she developed a track record of introducing new technologies to her clients. Maybe you could teach me how to tweet. In her book, The Watchman's Rattle, A Radical New Theory of Collapse, which you all have a copy of, so that means you now have to read it. She explains how individuals can solve complex problems through a spontaneous, intuitive flash of insight, a skill that can be harnessed to solve seemingly intractable problems. The success of her book led to a weekly radio program in 2010 called Rattler Radio, which was renamed and syndicated as the Costa Report. That's just much more boring. I like the Rattler Radio. And is currently among one of the fastest growing radio programs in the central coast of California. So please help me in welcoming Rebecca Kosta.
Can everyone hear me? I have a clip-on mic. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Okay. The first thing I want to say, I want to thank the conference organizers for their courage in having an evolutionary biologist talk to you. That's going to become relevant in just a minute here. I am a sociobiologist by training, and that means that I look for the evolutionary reasons that we behave the way we do. And in particular today, I'm going to talk to you about the big elephant in the room. That is irrational human behavior. Because a lot of you are science wonks, administration wonks, so on and so forth, and it's puzzling. You know what the problems are. You know what the solutions are. We certainly have enough technology. And everyone's up here, and we're all in violent agreement. I'm walking around this room, and it's a lot of smart people. We know what needs to be done. It's not getting done. So you have to wonder. So if we were rational, a book would never be published again. We have Kindle now, right? We never need a newspaper, right? I mean, if we were rational organisms, but all of your models are based on us acting and behaving in a rational way, and yet you run up against this irrational behavior, and it becomes a big problem. Now, one thing I want to say is that some of you are beating yourselves up with a pretty big stick. You know, we should do this. We've been talking about this for 30 years. And so what I want to do today is I want to talk to you about why you don't need to beat yourself with that stick anymore. And before I get going, I do want to say my clout score is 60. Does that mean anything to anyone here? How many of you know what your clout score is? Raise your hand. Okay, that's 3 people. So let me just briefly, before I get started here, because I pretty much thought that was the case. I'm from Silicon Valley, so we were looking at clout scores about 10 years ago. A clout score tells you your influence in the entire world, right? And so Obama is 99. That's his clout score. Mine's slightly lower, only 60, right? But to put it in perspective, Thomas Friedman, The World is Flat, is around 40, and Malcolm Gladwell, I think he's around 35. So just because you publish a best-selling book and you think you got lots to yak about, you're not necessarily engaging people. That's what clout's about. It's your influence, your ability to affect change. And that score is becoming more and more important. So I will teach you how to tweet. But more importantly, you have to figure out what those clout scores are. Now, a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today is going to be upsetting, considering what you heard this morning. Bear with me. We're going to get to the good part. It's going to kind of be a downer, but we're going to get to the good stuff. Because what I want to talk to you about is having a million options having a million choices, having a million ways and directions you can go, to the human brain is the same as having none. And this fundamentally is the problem. So by a show of hands, okay, I am clicking. By a show of hands, and I'm only going to ask you to raise your hand one time. Well, I might do it twice. How many people have noticed just in the last 5 or 10 years, things have gotten a lot more complicated? Shoot your hand up. Okay, keep your hand up. I want you to look across the room. That is your therapy for today. You can skip your psychiatric appointment this week. That's your therapy. It's not just happening to you, it's happening to everybody. Complexity is the real issue that we're up against right now. And if you really think about it, we're manufacturing data in picoseconds. We're making new discoveries every minute of every day. This is Eric Schmidt, a very dear friend of mine. Every 2 days, we create as much information as we did since the dawn of civilization to year 2003. That's the environment you're functioning in. Does anybody know what this is? This is the chart that General McChrystal put up at a press conference when we were in Afghanistan, when we were increasing our troop size. And he said, when we understand this chart, we win the campaign in Afghanistan. And for a moment, CNN made a mistake. They turned the camera back at the press, and you saw everybody put their pen down and go, what the heck? Guess what this is? This is the Affordable Health Care Act. Anybody seen any similarity there? Like it might be a little bit of a problem. By the way, this was the simplest chart that I could get on a slide. Most of them were several pages long. What's in the bill? Nancy Pelosi, if you don't think complexity is a problem, when you have a leader like Nancy Pelosi, and I'm not picking sides here, Democratic or Republican, when you see her on the television put her hand on the health care bill and say, I'm really glad we passed it, so now we can read it and figure out what's in it, you got a problem. What did you just vote on? It's 363,000 words. I like to count things. The entire U.S. energy bill was 157,000. And if you want to apply what's happening in terms of volume to your own field, you can find out that medical information is doubling every 4 years. I argue it's every 3 years, and I can make a case for that. By the time you graduate with a medical degree, what do you really know, right? To keep up with state of the art, the latest poll is that you need to devote, every physician needs to devote 160 hours a week to looking at new breaking papers. Really? And 81% of physicians admit they spend less than an hour a day. They don't have that. We are, if you've never heard this term before, we are time impoverished. This is what's happening to us. Medicine has become too complex. About 20% of the knowledge that clinicians use is evidence-based. Evidence-based, to me, as a data wonk, means structured data. In just a moment, we're going to talk about unstructured data, that Twitter sphere that we're talking about. 95% of the data that you need is unstructured. Unstructured means inaccessible, unusable. So what is the problem? It's the 4 V's. If you haven't heard of this, you're going to hear more about this in the coming days. Velocity, the velocity at which the data is coming in. The volume, the size of visual data, the size of the medical information that's coming at you as people start to enter in off their mobile phones more and more and more. Where's it all going? How's it going to be analyzed? The data means nothing unless you can correlate it. There's too much to correlate. It's the velocity, it's the volume, it's the variety, unstructured and structured data. They're now getting into facial recognition. I was talking to an earlier speaker about this, to look at your face to see how much pain you're in to figure out how much pain medication to give you. Do you know how much data that is? Watching your face every second of every day? And the veracity. For every study that you find that says one thing, as a patient, as a client, I can tell you that I can find 25 in foreign countries that negate it. How does a person go through medical data without a medical degree, let alone with a medical degree, and get through it? So what we have is we have more data, more people, more ways. But here's the catch. Biological change, evolution often requires millions of years. Now, somebody amongst you is going to come up to me and say, what about epigenetics? We're not going to talk about that today because I don't have time to. But here's the nice thing about this conference. They have allowed a room, because I'm going to give you many more questions than I'm going to give you answers. They have allowed a room so that when I'm done, we're going to adjourn there. And we're going to talk about your specific challenges and how some of the models that I show you today can be applied. So we want to drill down and make this a more hands-on interactive session. And you can't do that in a format like this. So we're going to do this in just a minute. What happens when complexity races ahead of the brain's ability to understand it? Well, we become gridlocked. We become paralyzed. Too many options, too much data, can't decide. And we become unable to fix our problems, and we begin passing them from generation, right, to generation, from person to person, as they grow worse. And by worse, I mean they exponentiate. One thing the human brain doesn't do well is we don't understand exponentiation. We think in a linear way. So as a result of that, our leaders and us, we always think we have more time. And then suddenly, the fiscal cliff. The cliff didn't just get there. 10 years ago, Paul O'Neill, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, wrote a big report and he said, gosh, we're going to be in the hole here in a very short amount of time. The fiscal cliff is coming a decade ago. And you know what that got him? It got him fired by Bush and Cheney. Right? And then 10 years later, we're going fiscal cliff, fiscal cliff. Well, we had a report that was available to the public. We find that every civilization, every organization eventually reaches a cognitive threshold. Why? Easy. There's two clocks. One is the clock of progress, which is moving in picoseconds. The other clock is a slow pace of evolution. Every time the hand moves, millions of years go by. Now, we can argue whether those clocks are meeting today or 50 years from now, but logic would say eventually a gap will occur. That uneven rate of change between biology and complexity causes a gap. And what's interesting is how we respond to that gap. And that's what my book is about. Now, this is going to be relevant to you in just a moment. The last evolutionary milestone we had in cognition was when we stood upright. Just about the time we stood upright, you haven't thought about evolution for a long time. So we're going to go back to school. When we stood upright, we could see danger coming. We could see predators coming from very far away. It was a great evolutionary advantage, but we didn't necessarily know what to do with them. We didn't know if they were friends. We didn't know if we should attack and eat them or we were going to be eaten. So during that period of time, a period of time of 4 to 5 million years, the frontal cortex grew. That's why you go to the Museum of Natural History and you see a very narrow brow ridge, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. That's about a third of the brain right now, and that's your CEO. That's the part of your brain that has to take in all this data, and it has to make a decision. When organizations are young, the problems are simple and they're easily managed by the left and right brain that you've evolved to this point in time. One way to think about evolution is if we took a Neanderthal and we dropped him into Times Square today, he wouldn't do very well. If we take us and put us in a time machine and jettison us a million years in the future, you're the Neanderthal. Trust me, in a few thousand years, they're going to look back at us lopping off breasts and testicles as a cure as pretty savage. I think we can agree that's how it's going to look. They did what to cure people? Over time, problems become larger. They become more complex. My definition of complexity comes out of Harvard University. By the way, any of you leaving here today, do not buy books on complexity. Why? They're too complex. They're too hard to read. I don't like to read them. My head's going to explode trying to understand them. The simple definition of complexity is this. There are more wrong choices than there are right. And the number of wrong options are exponentially getting larger. So over time, you are entering what I call a high failure rate environment. The environment all of you in this room are trying to survive is a high failure rate environment. You're going to call it wrong more than right. Now this flies in the face of some of the things you heard today, which is, why all these wasteful things? Because you're playing your odds. That's the simple answer. And you're going to continue to play those odds, and there's going to be a lot of waste because there's more options coming. And there's no time in a mission-critical situation to decide which solution is the right one, because there are more wrong ones than right ones. If you don't believe me, the tax code in the US has gone from 504 pages to 73,000 pages. Only a moron would file their own taxes. All you guys that downloaded software and did it this year? I don't think so. Credit card contracts used to be 400 words, now they're over 20,000. I've never met anybody who's read their credit card contract. By the way, never. I don't even know why we have it if we don't read it. There are 800,000 apps in the App Store. Verizon has a new smartphone out that has 200,000 apps on it. There's a commercial about that. You can't handle 200,000 of anything. You can't. And there are over 240 selections on the cheesecake menu. I went out with my friends and I go, there's a lot of stuff here. I'm going to count them. And they go, we hate taking you to dinner. You're annoying. I am. You don't want to go to dinner with me. I'm always counting everything just to see the level of complexity that I'm dealing with. That many things on a menu, really? 1 out of 5 diagnoses are now estimated to be incomplete or inaccurate. 1.5 million errors. The latest guess is 500 patients a day dying. Complexity, this is a simple truth. The more complex things are, the harder it is to get to the facts. The harder knowledge is to acquire. And when complexity makes knowledge difficult to acquire, we have this wonderful apparatus. We just substitute a belief. Don't we? You have to move forward with something. You have 2 baskets. You either have an empirical fact. When you can't get to the fact or you can't understand the fact, you have to have a belief. I would say that most Americans have decided on the Affordable Health Care Act on beliefs, because I've yet to talk to anybody who could figure that chart out. It's a dangerous situation. In your field, bloodletting went on for hundreds of years. Despite the empirical evidence, the patients were dying. They were dying, but no, we just didn't do it right. We didn't do it enough. We'll do small doses for more period of time. Trial and error, trial and error. It took a long time for bloodletting to go away. We have other beliefs too. Dr. Oz tells people that you'll lose weight if you eat raspberry ketones. Everybody hear that? Or the mad stampede, you couldn't stock stores with enough raspberry ketones. Why? Because people believe anything. They believe anything. And we also have beliefs about stem cell research, climate change. We have 1.5 million readings of the Earth's surface temperature. And you'll still have people saying, nope, no global warming. Okay, maybe they need 2 million. Maybe they need 4 million. Recently, this is a side story, that Donald Trump, when he read my book, he decided he wanted to endorse it. And I thought this was a terrible idea. I went to my publisher and I said, all my credibility gone if you put Donald Trump's endorsement on there. They didn't listen to me. They go, no, this is good. This is good. People will read your book. So I had the privilege of going to talk to him. And he said, Kosta, this is a great book, but you're wrong about climate change. I was so close, so close. And I said, Mr. Trump, there's 1.5 million readings of the Earth's temperature going back, hundreds of years. We know that it's warming up. And I said, I think what you mean to say is that there's an argument about how much man is responsible for it. What role have we played in that? And he said, that's what I said. I said, no, you said there's no climate change. He said, that's what I said. At that point, when Trump's annoyed with you, you say, thank you very much, Mr. Trump, for the endorsement, and you can quickly exit. That isn't what he said. His language was, there's no climate change. So we have beliefs about all kinds of things. What is a belief? It's simply unproven. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It means there's no empirical facts either way. It's cognitively inexpensive. You either believe it or you don't. If you have to prove something, that is a rigorous cognitive exercise. Every scientist in here knows. And we have small and large beliefs. You put your money in the bank, you write a check, you think it's going to be there. One day, it might not, right? You're crossing the street, light turns green, you start to walk. In New York, they don't even wait for the light to turn green. That's how you know a New Yorker. They go, it's about the time, and they start walking, and you go with them. It turns out, if you look at the long haul of human history, that the human organism has been designed to function on both beliefs and knowledge. You can't find any group of humans that did not flourish under belief. So we drew we drew little artwork on cave walls to save us from large predators, to help us catch larger prey, to make women more fertile. And scientific discoveries. I always get scientists going, we don't believe in beliefs. We don't believe in beliefs, really? And I go, well, what do you call a hypothesis? Yeah, you use different language, but trust me, all science starts with a belief as well. And it turns out that over the long course of human history, civilizations and your organizations thrive when there's an accommodation for beliefs and also the vigorous pursuit of facts. But there comes a point in time when beliefs begin to dominate and knowledge, empirically based decisions take a back seat, and we become susceptible to unproven claims. I know you know who Dr. Oz is, right? Do you know who the other guy is? Bernie Madoff. I love this picture. I would have given him my money. By the way, the people who turned over their life savings to Bernie Madoff, they weren't mom and pops like me. These were people that had been in the market a long time. They were sophisticated investors. Why would they turn money over to someone who says, listen, it's too complicated. I know how to make money. Isn't that really what's going on? So decisions and policies eventually become shaped by irrational beliefs rather than knowledge. This is where you head. Now, I use the example of the Mayans because it's not political. We've moved away from them for many years, right? But for 3,000 years, they knew they had a tenuous relationship with rainfall. They knew if it didn't rain, the civilization was toast. And so many people go to see the big pyramids, but really what you should go to see is that they were master hydraulic engineers. They dug huge reservoirs, unprecedented for their time. They dug underground cisterns, developed the first refrigeration systems. When food was going to be scarce, they stored it in these underground cisterns where the water was, so that they would have food during scarcities. And it is absolutely amazing that they practiced crop rotation, water conservation, all of these things. And in parallel, they were practicing fetishism. They were making sacrifices of captured slaves so that the gods would make the rain come. Both empirical, man-made rational remedy, as well as beliefs. But over a period of time, the last 1,000 years, 500 years, you see them give up on empirical based. No more cisterns, no more dams. No more water conservation. They start to escalate fetishism. At first, they're murdering more captured slaves. That isn't working, so they turn on their own people. They begin to sacrifice the old and the infirm. They move to young virgins. And just before the fall of the Mayan Empire, they are sacrificing brand new, unspoiled infants by throwing them off the tops of the pyramids. Now, a lot of people say to me, we're not doing that. Gosh, Rebecca, that's pretty morbid thought. And I say, no. We're flying planes into buildings and seeing that as a solution. To me, not really that much different. So we're in a reoccurring spiral. That's the bottom line. The first sign is complexity outpaces our cognitive capabilities, and we become gridlocked. The second is there's a confusion between what is a belief and what is a fact, a la Donald Trump. The third is that policy becomes irrational because it's not based on empirical data anymore. It's shaped by opinion and sometimes polls. But I won't go into that, maybe when we're in our other session. In 1976, Richard Dawkins called these beliefs and these viral behaviors memes. And like genes, memes replicate, they mutate, or they grow extinct. Hint, hint, that's how you get your clout score up. Yeah, everybody took a note on that? As complexity accelerates, super memes and beliefs take over. They take over in your organization. They don't just take over because Dr. Oz says, let's go get raspberry ketones. In your organization, there are belief systems, and they are obstacles to progress, and you know what they are. In my book, I cover 5 of them. One of them is when things get too complicated, you see people engage in irrational opposition. They begin to say no to everything. We see this in Washington, D.C. right now. There are 10,000 more no's than there are yeses. Personalization of blame. There's an old expression, I love this expression, the hunt for someone to blame is always successful. It should be over your doors, right? The insurance companies, no, it's the patient advocate, it was the nurse, it's the health department, it's the government, look, we can go around and point the finger at everybody. We all share in the blame. Counterfeit correlation. One thing happens, another thing happens in the same span of time, and we say they're related. Wrong. The kinds of problems you're dealing with are the kinds of problems physicists deal with. They're random, they're chaotic, fast-moving, too many variables. One variable changes 0.0001%, all of the rest of them change. That's what what physicists deal with. And how many of you are really good friends with physicists? No, not really. Right? That's because that's the world they live in. They made friends with variables, not other human beings. Silo thinking, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Right? People's jobs get threatened in a bad economy. They dig down, they become territorial. That's an instinct that has helped our DNA be in the room today. And extreme economics. Not everything you do can fit into a business model. Don't try to shove it in to a traditional economics model. The only thing I worry about is people going, hey, look at the consumer industry. It's doing all of this buyer surveillance and collecting data and really getting to know the patient. Be careful of that, because all their models are based on, now I can sell them this and get this amount of money. You want to be really careful adopting these widespread consumer models, because they're all based on an ROI. And everything you do can't be. And you can't force it into a model. Some things you're going to have to sit down with your board, you're going to sit in a committee and say, we just have to do it because it's the right thing. End of story. There's nothing beyond that. There's no defense. There's no explanation. There's no, well, could we maybe get money this way? Forget it. It's over. This is one of my favorite sayings. It's from my mentor, Dr. E.O. Wilson from Harvard. We live in a time when we have Paleolithic emotions. You spoke about that earlier. Medieval institutions and godlike technology. You think we might be gridlocked? You think we might be having a problem? But you know, a cognitive threshold is not our only evolutionary obstacle. A while back, we were all told a lie, that we were born blank slates. And your mom, everybody remember this? Your mom wrote on it, your dad, your teacher, and then that's who you became? We completely forgot about your evolutionary emotions and instincts that got your DNA to this point in time. I don't know how we did that. We acted as though you were just a vessel and we were going to fill you up. Wrong. There's a lot of inherited behaviors that were once vital to your perpetuation, which lag behind human progress today. There are obstacles. Collaboration versus competition. Some of us come from great competitors. And despite wanting to collaborate, we find ourselves arguing all the time, right? Aggression and violence. In nature, aggression is a standard. And we go, well, oh my God, this person turned to violence. You know, we're better than that. Really? I don't know. Maybe millions of years from now, but maybe not so much right now. Greed and hoarding. That's a natural a survival reaction. I'm not excusing these things. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. And an attraction to high-calorie foods. Now, I just discovered something recently. Right? I discovered something very interesting about myself. Now, I struggle with weight. Some of you will identify with this and some of you don't. I've struggled with weight all my life. And I'm going to tell you that we'll have a nice buffet and there'll be celery sticks and carrots and then there'll be glazed donuts next door. And I'll go, that's what I should eat, and my hand goes over and grabs a donut. Now, I should never eat another donut the rest of my life. And this really puzzled me. I'm an intelligent woman. I know that I should exercise, but I find that there's no exercise invented I like. I'm sorry, there isn't. I've tried them all. So I was thinking about this and I'm going, why am I like this? Why? Well, I know better. I am the test subject case right here. And I realized that calories are very scarce in nature. The amount of calories it would have taken my ancestors to find an apple tree, climb to the top of the apple tree, get the apple, and eat the apple would have been more calories to get there were no orchards, right? So I have discovered that I am the descendant of extremely good high-calorie seeking organisms. In times of food scarcity, my ancestors said donuts. And those that picked the celery and carrot sticks, they didn't make it. They're not in the room today. No, notice. Also, my ancestors were very good at staying still and not wasting those calories unless they had to fight or look for more. Right? But it's not me that needs to change. In those days, you couldn't find the calories. Now, there is a donut at every corner. The environment has changed. And I'm sitting here with a big stick, and I had this conversation with Oprah not too long ago as well. I'm sitting here with a big stick beating myself up, and I'm going, no, that's the reason I'm alive. Sometimes you're violent because that's how your ancestors made it. That's why your DNA made it. And there is something that your ancestors did. By the way, I'm not the only one. This is some more of my tribe. Anybody see a problem with this? What you don't see is that they're waiting burning fossil fuels for 20 minutes to get a parking place closer to the escalator. That's what you don't see. But territoriality. I had a fellow not too long ago, I got off the stage and he goes, I don't really believe that I have any biological obstacles that I'm up against. I don't believe in irrational behavior. And I said, okay. And then I thought about it and I said, do you go grocery shopping at all? And he said, well, yeah, I go with my wife. And I said, listen, let me save you a lot of trouble. I don't want you going up and down the aisles, right, taking all your time getting your stuff. Next time you're in the grocery store, I want you to go straight to the checkout stand and shop out of other people's carts. He said, what? I said, the milk, the bread, everything you want, it's in their carts. They haven't paid for it. It's not theirs. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. I said, why not? You haven't violated anything. I said, what do you suppose will happen? He goes, they'll get mad at me. And I said, yeah. He goes, they'll call a store manager. I go, it's not theirs. They haven't paid for it. I said, because that cart is my territory. And my territory had the resources essential to my survival. And today, my territory may be my department. It may be my job. It may be the information I have, like patient records, that I don't want to give you. That may be my territory. And this is why, by the way, sports teams have figured out man-to-man and zone coverage work. But I can't tell you how many corporations or organizations I walk in, they got some other kind of cockamamie organizational structure. And I go, that won't work, because we're designed to protect those we love and our territory, a physical territory. So when you start tapping into what we are, what this biological spacesuit is designed to do and what it's not to do, what it's not designed to do, you get a different answer. You start structuring your organization radically differently. And for a lot of you who are in the preventative mode of wanting to know why preventative health care won't get off the ground, well, that's an easy one, and we're going to talk about a lot of that in the session that I'm going to have after this. That's because biologically, when you see a snake in the road, your body is designed to fill with chemicals, and you either kill the snake or you run. If you ever sit down with a 20-year-old and say, Social Security and Medicare are going to run out of money, has anybody tried that with your kids? Don't. Because they look at you and they go, We're simply biologically not wired to worry about long-term problems. That's why you can't get anybody's attention until it's the fiscal cliff. So what do you have to do? Once you know that, you have to make everything a snake. Are you with me? Don't say, we could have this problem a year down the road. Wrong. Wrong. It became Social Security and Medicare. The snake is going to bite us today, like the next 5 minutes. Okay, now you got our adrenaline going. Now you got us paying attention. If the gap between progress and slow evolution is the problem, then how do we break the cycle? Because I don't want to make this about gloom and doom, and I like to use funny examples like obesity and the snake in the room and everything. But in truth, we've now done an amazing thing. We've broken down the human genome, and we've discovered that we have less than a 5% difference from a bonobo monkey. Now, thank goodness, it's quality, not quantity. Because I don't see any of you throwing food across the room or trying to have sex with your chairs or any other thing. And I spend a lot of time with bonobos, and that's what they do most of the time. That 5% is an amazing thing because it's allowed us to build rocket ships and go to the moon and be civilized. That 5%, the 5% that matters, is our ability to reason. And I would argue that the highest instrument of our genetic inheritance of humankind today is our ability to preview the future, do thought experiments, see what's coming, and then shape an action today to prevent a negative outcome. No other creature does that. That's us, and us alone. It's a blessing. and we've squandered it. So I break our organizations down into 4 types. I'm not going to have time to talk about that today, but I'm going to tell you that you belong to one of these organizations. You are either predictive, in which case you have decided and built an organization that can deal with high levels of risk and massive amounts of failure. You are preemptive. You don't want to be as predictive. You want a little less risk. You're looking ahead at what the problems will be, and you're fashioning some kind of action today that will mitigate and make the consequence smaller when it does come, or have it go away altogether. You're compensatory. When I go out on the road, I'm allowed to have a donut. Every time I travel, I'm allowed to have a donut because I can't get rid of the I need a donut in my head. I haven't fixed the problem. I've just mitigated it. I've developed a compensatory behavior. If you're always late, Google has a new app for you. It's called Google Now. It's compensatory technology. It says, yeah, you're always late to meetings. So now I'm going to back up your calendar 15 minutes. Actually, I'm going to go and look ahead and see what the traffic's like on the route to the meeting that you're going to. There's a little traffic, so you're backed up 20 minutes now to go. Everything that you need, that you can't do correctly, you can plug in, and Google Now will get to know who you are, all your weaknesses, and in my case, I plugged in, I was one of the tests for Google Now. I typed in my struggle with weight, and it said, we checked ahead and the airline has a salad and we ordered it for you. I was mad. Google Now is better than me. It's helping me to be a better human. Or you're in a reactive organization. I will tell you that those who preempt will prevail. So there are 2 antidotes for growing complexity. We can have behavioral adaptation, which is in the form of mitigations, or physical adaptation. And I'm going to talk to you briefly about that because there's probably a lot more people that are neuroscientists in the audience today. Mostly when I speak, people don't know about neuroscience, so that part I'll go quickly. Mitigations buy us time, but remember, it's only a time buyer. When we talk about water conservation, is that a mitigation or a cure? Mitigation, right? And here's how you know. Because one day when the water doesn't come, there's nothing to conserve. So while all my ecology brethren are going, we have to conserve, I go, no, we have to make more water because there's more people. Conservation only buys us time to go make the water. So don't talk to me about conservation. What are we doing with the time that we bought? According to Dr. Yanir Bar-Yam out of Harvard University, I mentioned this before, a complex environment is one where there's more wrong solutions than right ones. If you take nothing else away, take high failure rate environment away with you. And complexity basically causes us to become very bad pickers when it comes to a solution. And so through trial and error, we run the clock out. That's how we operate. You can take the Gulf oil spill as an example. We had a mission critical. That to me is a patient dying in the ER. A mission critical situation, time sensitive. We bring a lot of smart people together and they say, let's drop a concrete box on the hole. And then we do, and we wait 30 days and go, no, and we're still watching these mushroom Hiroshima-looking clouds of oil come out in the Gulf. And then we say, all right, we're going to drill from the side and siphon some of the oil off so it doesn't reach the surface. We wait 30 days, that isn't working. And the third solution was static kill, and it seems to be holding. But just imagine if that had been solution number 87. Then we'd still be watching the news cover one of the worst ecological disasters that we have encountered here. But here's the thing. We have models for high rates of failure. And this is what I would like to impress you with. Rather than pick what is the right approach and take it all the way down like you would a column, I'm going to try to infect you today with this idea of becoming a venture capitalist. If you know venture capitalists, they invest in 100 companies, and out of those 100 companies, they only expect 10 or 15 to do well. But every venture capitalist I know in California is doing very, very well with those odds. They know that no amount of due diligence in the time that they have will allow them to call it any better. There's a huge waste factor there, and yet they're succeeding like no other model. In a high failure rate environment, it is in your interest to take many solutions, as long as they're not, in medicine it's a little different. You can't always go, we're going to give you 5 different cures at one time, because some are mutually exclusive. But when it comes to your organization, there are very few things that are mutually exclusive. Don't fall into that trap. People will get into arguments in corporations I'm in organizations I'm in, and I go, why can't you do both? We don't have enough money. Yes, you do, because the volume of the funnel can be the same as the volume of the tube. It's just that you're going to fund a lot of possible exploration, a lot of possible programs, and you're going to give them first-round funding. And then you're going to measure the empirical results. And some of them are going to die. They don't get second-round funding. And then you're going to measure the empirical results again, and then some don't get third fund. The amount of money spent is the same. How it's spent, dramatically different. In the case of the rescue of the Chilean miners, where they successfully got every Chilean miner out alive, this is exactly the model they used, not the Gulf oil model. They went after 16 rescue plans in tandem because they knew that no amount of information would let them call which rescue plan to pick. And 16 went to 15, went to 14, went to 12, kept narrowing down, and when they did successfully extract all the Chilean miners, they were down to 3 rescue plans that they were going after. But here's the thing, here's the catch. How many organizations are going to let you fail 80% of the time? If you come in with the funnel model and you say, yep, 80% of the ideas we put on the table are going to fail, how many organizations say, yeah, we embrace that? Probably not. Diversification is also a very vital thing when it comes to a high failure rate environment. In nature, which is what I study, any drive toward singularity is a drive toward extinction. Please write this down. If you're trying to do one data system, if you're betting everything on a stimulus package where you're going to give everybody $200 and the global recession is going to be cured, any time that anybody's betting on one solution, you've already got a problem. Anytime anybody's arguing about one solution, you've got a problem. The drive toward efficiency is many times a drive toward singularity. And your risk is going up as you move along. So I was asked several years ago about the euro. I was against the euro. And now I love playing that interview over and over again because I said, all it's going to take is one country going down, and they will take all the other countries down because it's a drive toward singularity. Before World War II, we had vastly different economic systems. So a bad mortgage policy in the United States didn't necessarily take the rest of the world down. Now, for the ease of doing business, the way to raise capital, the stock markets, the way that global economies look, have become homogeneous. Now, we are all subject to each other's bad policies. You don't want to do that. You want to create some autonomy. And efficiency becomes the greatest excuse for homogeneous organizations. In nature, diversity means longevity. That's why we have so many varieties of fish, butterflies, insects, ants, because when the environment changes, some of them will have what's required to survive, and some will not. By the way, we're talking about Twitter and social media. Crowdsourcing is a huge part of this. I believe, I use different language because I'm a Silicon Valley wonk. I don't talk about Twitter and social media. I talk about tapping in to the crowd's wisdom. We used to do that. Remember Council of Elders, right? Remember that? We used to tap into crowd. Now we don't so much. And that's a form. Ultimately, technologies are going to enable you to do crowdsourcing, to tap into the wisdom of the masses. And don't be fearful of it, right? We're not always right, but when we're wrong, we figure it out pretty fast, pretty darn fast. And in that respect, big data and mobile applications will be a big part of that. I'm not going to go into IBM's Watson program because there's a speaker that's going to be talking to you shortly about IBM's Watson program, but I do work with IBM and have been working with them since the beginning of their Watson program. And the Watson program is basically everything we know about medical data put into a computer that's a natural English language program. And so if a patient comes into an ER, a person can go up. It doesn't matter if it's the lowest qualified person or the most senior person in the ER. They can ask questions, and Watson will come back and say, my diagnosis is 26% it's this, 14% it's this, 12% it's this. But here's the great part. But if you were to go get me this data, this data, this data, gives them pointers, I can improve my diagnosis by 96%. It's the great equalizer. Once I have a mobile phone and I can type in what the symptoms are, what the known empirical data is, and it says, yes, but go get this data, this data, this data in that order, and I can improve my diagnosis, you've really got something, and that's where medicine is going. And I'm not going to talk about the data baby because I think they'll talk about that as well. But that's real-time data being analyzed in a natural language query where someone can say, the baby is tossing around. That's unusual for the baby. And it comes back and it says, check this, 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 this. This is what I think is going on. So to succeed in a high failure rate environment, a diversity of solutions, use the venture capital model. Even as physicians, quit trying to figure out the one treatment. If you can effect more than one treatment at a time and they're not mutually exclusive, do it for a short period of time. That's the way to solve that. Expect failure. Fail fast. In my own organization, that's our motto. Go for the long shots, but prove them to be wrong ideas and bad ideas as quickly as possible so we don't have to invest a lot of time and money. Leverage big data and mobile application technologies and crowdsourcing, internal and external, and above all, avoid belief-based decisions inside your organization. But to do that, you got to identify what those big beliefs are, what those super beams are. Mitigation and technology buys time, but physical adaptation is really the key. And here we have neuroscience, because if you think about it, this is the first time in human history, this just really excites me, that you could put a skull cap on any of our heads and put us in a lab and administer increasingly complex problems to us and watch what our brain does. Well, you know what it does? It goes to the left brain and it does deconstruction. It says, I got this many solutions, and I keep collecting data, and then I get down to one or two answers, and then I pick one. Then we got the right side of the brain that's more synthesis. So you're talking to me, and there's a little sweat above your lip, and I think you're lying. By the way, you're all very good liar detectors, because that was essential to survival in prehistoric times. We couldn't trust liars. They couldn't be trusted to stand guard, or they would take more than their part of food. So if you ever have a feeling that someone's lying to you, don't bother with the empirical evidence. They're lying, right? Everybody's had an experience. A year later, you go, I knew it. Right, okay. So what is insight? Insight, we've discovered a third form of problem solving that's going on in the human brain. It seems to be evolving. And for many years, this was folklore. We heard about Archimedes sitting in the tub and the water spilled over, and suddenly he said, oh, gee, displacement theory, he discovered that. Newton, an apple falling on his head. We kind of thought this was part of the mad scientist story. But now we know, no, that's actually a process in the brain. Don't you hate how science wrecks everything? It's such a cool story, the apple fell, oh yeah, gravity. No, that's not really what happens at all. We've discovered that insight is a spontaneous organization of chaos. You have all this data in your head, and suddenly, two pieces of data that have never been connected are going to be connected in a way that you've never done it before. And it comes on like a freight train. So if you think about the left side is like a grocery store where everything's organized, and the aisles are, you can find where the snack foods are, where the donuts are very easily. The right side is more like a showroom, a furniture showroom. You've got a couch, you've got a picture, a painting, magazines, and they're all organized in some way. Then you have insight. You walk into a room and you say, I got a problem, and bam, comes on like a freight train. One of the things we know about insight is when we rush into the room and we ask someone, how did you come up with that answer? They go, I don't know. There's no story. I thought about this, I thought about this. There's no story. It just came on. Another thing, if you think you had an insight but people are arguing with you, no, you didn't have one. Insights are always right. They're amazingly elegant, and people will gravitate and get behind them immediately. But here's a really interesting thing about insights. 300 milliseconds before you're going to solve a problem that's way above the pay grade of your left brain thinking and your right brain thinking, we see your brain starting to slow down. It cuts off auxiliary stuff that it doesn't need to pay attention to. And we see a little part of your brain called the ASTG light up like a Christmas tree. And you know in this room that at the point at which you can predict that someone's going to have an insight, you're really onto something, and we're there. 300 milliseconds before you're going to have a spontaneous solving of a very, very highly complex problem. Put two pieces of data together that you didn't know that you had and had never put together before. We know you're going to do it. And it's a very exciting discovery in neuroscience. But it happens to everybody. You have insights about all kinds of things. I had a carpenter call me up and he said, hey, I had an insight. A lot of people write to me about their insights and they say, well, I have them when I'm in the shower, I have them when I'm washing dishes, I have them when I'm walking, because there is something to say about relaxation and insights coming on, because insights are very taxing. Once you have one, you don't get to have one again right away. It's almost like the brain, it's so exhausting, the brain has to save up and have another one. Believe me, I do everything possible to induce insights, and we're not there yet. But if it happens to everyone, I had a carpenter say that he was struggling with a job of trying to get a heating vent underneath this lady's house, and he said, and there wasn't enough room, we were going to have to jack the house up, and he said, I was walking around, I was looking up, and I went, do you have an attic? And he said, for days we had been trying to figure out how to get the ducts underneath the house, and we decided we'd just come down through the attic. And he said, we'd never done a job like that before, but it works fine. But here's the thing, if you've never taken a physics class, you're not going to have an insight in physics. So my kids hate this, because loading content, that's my word for go to school, right? Loading content is the key. No data, no insights. And there's a quiet revolution going on in neuroscience right now relative to this. There are neuroscientific tools that are being developed to warm up the brain. It turns out the big discovery is the brain wants to warm up before you have to load content or before you have to make a very, very difficult decision. And we now have guys like Dr. Michael Merznick, who did some of the pioneering work in brain plasticity, developing neuroscientific tools to warm the brain up before you start your workday, before you have to study or learn something, make a decision, deal with a difficult boss, board of directors, whatever. It's a really good idea. It's interesting that we're finding that these brain warm-up tools in senior citizen facilities are helping to reduce car accidents. And we couldn't figure out what the connection was, but it turns out one of the exercises is to warm up your peripheral vision. And that's why they get into accidents. They get into accidents because their peripheral vision starts to get narrow. So they warm it up. So now insurance companies are looking at this, and they're going to create a log-on. So if you're over the age of 60, if you log on and do the brain warm-up before you go get in your car, they'll give you a discount. That's the world we're going to, right? Right? In my view, if you're all suffering with complexity, can you imagine what it's like to be 12 years old today? I can't imagine. I wouldn't be having, I wouldn't be raising children without giving them brain fitness in the morning, because I think it's child abuse not to give it to them. Actually, we've given it to 23,000 students, and after 4 years we've measured, and with no changes in curriculum, teacher paid, nothing, they have 2 times the academic achievement. And these are some of the statistics. We'll go through more of those later. And now, after knocking and banging, kicking at the administration's door, we have money to map the human brain. This is really exciting, because a lot of what you're dealing with right now is the limits of the human brain at this point in time. So in conclusion, James Watson discovered the double helix in DNA. I love this. One day he said, complexity makes really smart people like me look stupid. And I went, wow, if this guy's got a problem, why am I beating myself up? Really, why? Does anybody know who this is? Billy Beane, the Oakland athletics manager. If you have not seen the movie Moneyball, how many have seen the movie Moneyball? It's the greatest movie about adaptation that there is. You're going through Moneyball, right? There's a lot of people sitting there going, that's not the way we hire players. We do it this way, right? And we've always done it this way. And now along comes Billy Beane, puts his career on the line, big risk, right? He's a predictive guy. Brings in a statistician and says, this is the way you're going to hire in the future, right? So to sum up, complexity. A thriving society, a thriving organization, it allows an accommodation for beliefs and knowledge. It hits a cognitive threshold. Problems persist, they get larger. Then one way to think of collapse isn't as, like Mel Gibson movie of Mad Max. I don't see collapse that way. I see economic collapse, healthcare collapse as a reversion to simpler systems that the human organism knows how to deal with. That's one way to think, that systems get too complicated and then they go back. And so somebody asked me, what do I expect out of global economic systems? And I said, we'll go back to barter. Because I'll meet you in the street, you'll have wheat, I'll have eggs, and we'll determine what's fair. Because we understand how to do that. What we don't understand is these complex derivatives and fiat currency. That's a little bit above everybody's pay grade, right? So this is basically a very simple complexity curve. We start out with simple barter systems, simple health systems. They get really complicated. We revert back to simplicity. But the new discovery that we have is that we can't progress and we can't add complexity that we're not designed to deal with. So the solution is either behavioral or physical adaptation. And this is my favorite slide, and I'll make this my closing slide. Again, I really encourage you to come over so we can drill more deeply and I can answer some of your questions. We'll be in a conference room right after this presentation when they do your break. But I will say that nothing is written. This is Lawrence of Arabia, and it's one of my kids know that dinner's going to be late if there's a rerun of Lawrence of Arabia, because it's one of my favorite movies. But what I love is this argument that goes on throughout the movie, where every time something bad happens, the people that Lawrence is getting to know in the Middle East say, it is written. What can we do? It's written. And Lawrence keeps turning around and going, nothing is written. And so I just want to leave you with this thought that as we move faster and faster toward the future, incompetence is inevitable, but we can preempt and we can leverage new technologies and these new high failure rate models to succeed. We are in a different place than previous civilizations. We don't have to go their way. Whether we will or not, I can't say, because there are no facts about the future. By the way, if you ever have anybody arguing about the future, you could remind them of that. That's why we call it the future. So I want to thank you again for having me, and I hope I'll see you when we go to adjourn.